Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my double Game Week 37 deadline decisions. This is a weekly series where I take you through your final questions and dilemmas ahead of the upcoming deadline, and I'll also cover some of the key press conference updates that we've had today as well. If you do get any use out of today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, starting off with some of the key press conference updates ahead of double Game Week 37 with, of course, a focus on those teams that do double in Game Week 37. You will see that Newcastle aren't on here. I'll actually cover Newcastle separately in a second because we've got some pretty long quotes from Eddie Howe, and I'll leave it partially up to you to try and interpret some of those quotes, but some of them are I guess, like I said, it comes down to your interpretation of what you think that means for some of the key players. But starting with Chelsea, Reece James has returned to full team training and could be in the squad. But Pochettino did go on to say he might get 5, he might get 10, he might get 15. And if he could get 30, that would be amazing. So I honestly don't see Reece James starting in this double Game Week 37. And at the very most, it will be starting the second fixture. Unless Pochettino was lying, and I don't suspect he was based on how poor Reece James's fitness record has been recently, I just don't see Reece James starting the first one. So my interpretation is that he'll get probably minutes off the bench in both, and he may well get a start in 38, but there is also a small chance that he gets, obviously, one start the second game in 37. Gusto still appears to be fine and available after his cameo in 36, so whether you think Gusto gets 1, 2, 0 starts, again, that's up to your own interpretation. I think one start is probably quite likely for Gusto, but as I've said throughout the week, I wouldn't be surprised if he got none based on the current system that Chelsea are playing, but at least he is fit and available as far as we're concerned, and Sanchez is still only in partial training. That means that I'd be pretty sure now Petrovic is safe for the remainder of the season, so if you're looking for a doubling keeper this week and you're not tripled up on Chelsea, I think Petrovic is arguably the best choice you can go for. On Spurs, Ange Postecoglou has said no new injuries for Spurs, so nice and simple. And then on Man City, no new injuries for Man City as well. I think Werner and Davis are both confirmed out for the season, along with Udogie as well. And I mean, City's injury record, I think the same happened last season. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but City, when it comes to crunch time, just managed to get all of their key players back fit. So they are doing very, very well. Manchester United, this is the big one, right? Because a lot of us have Bruno Fernandes, and I think most of us were just going off the basis that we didn't think Bruno would be available because there were rumours going around that he wasn't in team training. But according to Erik ten Hag, as of Friday afternoon, Bruno was on the pitch. Now, a lot of people are misquoting that, and I think, to be honest, I probably misquoted it on Twitter, as Bruno's back in team training. We haven't had any confirmation that he's back in full team training, or even team training, by the way. We just have confirmation that he's on the grass. He could literally have just been jogging around by himself with no ball. So I initially saw this and was like, right, Bruno can't be sold now, but unless we get training pictures, which we may well do on Friday afternoon going into Friday evening, or unless we get some further embargoed quotes, this doesn't tell me that Bruno is definitely fit and available. But I think with Bruno, if there's any chance of him playing, he plays. The fact that we were making such a big deal that he missed out in 36 shows that he was injured. Now, you could look at that two ways. You could say, well, if he was really that injured, then maybe he will be eased back in. But the other way of looking at it is when Bruno's available, the man just plays. So I think there's a very good chance Bruno now plays probably 180 minutes in the double. But this isn't confirmation. It's not like that green light of he's definitely absolutely fine. So you are still open to remove him because the double isn't great anyway. Yes, they're two home fixtures, but it's Arsenal and Newcastle. So I think this will probably lead me towards keeping Bruno now, and I'll discuss my team more so at the end of the video. But I don't think this means that you can't sell him if you were looking to move to someone like a Richarlison. So, yeah, no confirmation, sadly. On Brighton, the injury issues in my team, I mean, I feel very hard done by. I'm not trying to get a sympathy vote here, but the injury issues that I have had in recent weeks, I must have had something like 8 or 9 injuries in 3 weeks. Now, I had 6 injuries in the defence alone. Then I had the Bruno injury. Bruno appears to be fine now, by the way. And then, obviously, Joao Pedro is now out. So, yeah, the big Brighton news today is that Joao Pedro has an ankle injury. And this is the quote from De Zerbi. It's sad news for us, and I think that's going to be the key word that I use to interpret this. It's sad news for us. Today it happened, and I don't know if he can play tomorrow. So, sadly for us, but also for Brighton, because the injury has happened, it sounds like pretty much just before the press conference, he doesn't have a definitive time frame on Joao Pedro's injury. Joao Pedro could be fit and available for the game. You never know. But I think given that Joao Pedro wasn't a great option anyway, and there are some really nice other options like Jackson and Wilson, and again, I'll discuss my team at the end of the video because I have Joao Pedro and I will now be selling Joao Pedro. But if you wanted to hold on to him in the hope that he's fine, you could do. But if it's an ankle injury, and De Zerbi said it's sad news for us. Because I just feel like he would have just like twisted his ankle slightly and he sort of just walked it off. He would have just said, oh, Joao Pedro picked up a bit of a knock, but he said it's sad news for us. That makes me think that the initial interpretation wasn't great. And I just don't see them risking Joao Pedro immediately. Like, they can just play Welbeck. They could even play a Dinger in the 10. They've got loads of options that they can do with that team. They don't have to play Joao Pedro. And therefore, I can't see him being risked. Maybe we'll get a better update later on or before the deadline. But as of right now, I think this makes Joao Pedro a sell, sadly. And I wasn't planning on selling him, but maybe it's a blessing in disguise because, like I said, there are some other good forward options. And we'll discuss some more forward options outside of Wilson and Jackson and Isak and Haaland a little bit later in the video to see if there are any alternatives. There is still no official update on Van Heck. I know a few people still have him, but most of the sort of Dutch journalists, media are all reporting that he's out for the season, but we haven't had that officially confirmed. But because there was no real mention of Van Heck being back, we've not seen him in training, I'd be pretty confident that Van Heck's just now out for the season. The only team to then finish up on before we move on to Newcastle in a bit more detail was actually Arsenal. And I think this is just mind games from Arteta. We've spoken about before that both Eddie Howe and Arteta just outright lie in their press conferences. That's not me being like negative towards them. They just genuinely do lie. They conceal information. So it's difficult to know how much to trust it. And I think in such a big game for Arsenal, and you can say all you want about Manchester United, this is a huge game for Arsenal in the Premier League title race. They know that on paper it should be a straightforward game, but sometimes it doesn't play out that way. I would not be surprised if Arteta is just throwing a few mind games in there. But essentially, he was pushed upon some rumours going around that there might be a few issues in the Arsenal squad. And he said, a few doubts. Tomorrow we can resolve because we have another training session. So we will have to wait and see. And then I think the journalist essentially pushed Arteta, was like, we've heard a few names going around. And he said a few names, yes. And I think Saka and Tomiyasu were mentioned. So he didn't come out here and say, yes, Saka is a serious doubt. But he did say, yes, the names being suggested, they do seem to be issues. The reason that Saka and Tomiyasu were mentioned is Tomiyasu was not pictured in training on Thursday and Saka was pictured in training, but he had heavy strapping. But the fact that he was in training, we've seen him, I mean, he's had strapping in pretty much every single training session and a lot of games as well. I don't think this would bother me as a Saka owner. I'm still pretty confident that Saka will play because Saka always does play. Not always, but most of the time. It's a bit like Bruno, I suppose. So yeah, he could miss out. This could be no mind games from Arteta. But I will always err on the side with Saka of just saying he's probably going to be fit and available. I am going to discuss a bit later in today's video whether I would be willing to sell Saka and then buy Saka back, maybe for a doubler. So if you do own Bukayo Saka, make sure to wait for that section at the end of the video because, yeah, you still have the option, I suppose, of selling him and then bringing him back if he is fit. But that fixture on paper looks absolutely beautiful against Manchester United. So those are some of the key presser updates. The only other team to discuss is Newcastle. So let's do that in a bit more detail and try and decipher Eddie Howe. So guys, for Newcastle, we've got some slightly longer quotes, and I wanted to discuss them in a bit more detail because I know a lot of people either own Trippier or are looking at Livramento and Hall. Maybe you've got Dubravka and you're wondering whether Pope might come in, and also Fabian Schär. Could we maybe hold on to him? So I thought I would just discuss this in a bit more detail here. So the first quote here is from Eddie Howe on Kieran Trippier, who has now been back in team training, which is really good. And this was, Gameweek 37 was roughly when Newcastle expected him back. So I've just taken the key parts of the press conference, the key quotes. And what he said was, he's getting closer. He's trained this week for the first time with the group, which has been brilliant. Really pleased. He's trained well as well. So not only is he trained, he's trained well. It's been a good week for him. So we'll make a decision today in terms of whether he's involved tomorrow. So not confirmation that he'll definitely be in the squad, but looking quite likely at the moment, you'd say. He's refreshed. He's had some time away as well in the training before this week, which I think has really helped him mentally and can help any player with that change of scenery. And I think he's ready to go. And what a way to end that quote with, I think he's ready to go. So my interpretation of this is that, and again, this is my interpretation, feel free to interpret it differently. I think Kieran Trippier will be in the squad, but not starting for the first game of Gameweek 37, and I think he'll start the second game of Gameweek 37. And that's been my prediction for a while now. I do think that you could interpret this as he's just ready to go. Like, he's been training well. It's Kieran Trippier. He's a very fit guy, but I just don't think there's a need to rush him back for Newcastle. I don't think Trippier is going to want to risk it either at the point that he is in his career. I think he'd rather take a little bit longer. I'm aware, by the way, that Kieran Trippier will be very, very eager to play, but I just don't think they're going to rush him back when Livramento and Lewis Hall have been playing very well. So my prediction is Livramento right back, Lewis Hall left back for the first game. The second game, Kieran Trippier comes back in at right back would be my prediction, although he might not start again. And then I think you've basically got one of Livramento and Hall for left back. And then in game week 38, you've got the similar situation. So if I own Trippier, I would keep him. Would this put me off Livramento and Hall? It probably would, unless I was really chasing the upside and I thought one of them had massive upside. Because to be honest, Livramento in particular, very, very attacking. Lewis Hall could get you an attacking return, and the fixtures aren't bad. But I just think there are enough other defenders, I think, that I would probably rather go for. If you don't have Dan Burn, I would definitely go there. So, yeah, maybe if you've got Livramento or Trippier, you just hold them. If you want to take the risk for either of them, you could go for it. But I still think this is quite difficult to predict. So if you can just go for the safety of minutes with Burn, I would probably go there. On Nick Pope, he said, I think if both goalkeepers were 100% fit, it's a very difficult call as to whether to start Dubravka or Pope. So it does suggest that he really does trust Dubravka. But I think Nick is still building himself back to his very best levels. And again, midway through the sentence there, but Pope's basically building up to full strength and full fitness. And this is because it was a reoccurring injury, I should note, for Nick Pope. It's not the first time he's had that specific injury. He said, so I think that last week for me, it was very clear. So very easy. Martin deserved to play and Nick's still finding his rhythm from a long-term injury. Now Nick's had a really good training week, and that is Pope, just to say it the first name. So Nick Pope has had a really good training week, I have to say. I think he's been really good this week. He's been the Nick Pope that we had seen for the majority of his time at Newcastle. So he's certainly in a really good place and building his strength back up. I would interpret this as you might get one more game for Dubravka. But unless Dubravka has an absolutely astonishing game there and or Nick Pope is struggling for fitness more than Eddie Howe is suggesting here, and maybe he's not fully confident diving on that shoulder, I think Pope probably gets at least one start here. Would I sell Dubravka? If I was on a bench boost, I think I'd be very tempted, but I hate saying that given that you could just see Dubravka just start both games and maybe Nick Pope just starts in game week 38. I wouldn't be entirely shocked. So unfortunately, and I know you're watching this for advice, but it comes down to your interpretation of this quote. I think given that Pope has been in training and training well, and he is their first choice goalkeeper, I think Pope will get at least one start in 37 would be my prediction. But I'm very sorry if I get that wrong. That's just the way I'm interpreting this here. You could just keep him and risk it. But I think on a bench boost, you don't want to risk having no goalkeeper. I suppose it depends what other issues you have to sort out and which other goalkeepers you have available to you. Just finishing off with Fabian Schar. This sounds slightly more positive, but I still think he is a sell. And unless, again, you're not bench boosting and you maybe want Fabian Schar in 38, but he said, I don't think he'll figure tomorrow. Feature, I suppose, that's supposed to be. I don't suppose he'll be available for tomorrow. Let's wait and see about next week. But he's certainly improving and feeling good. So it doesn't sound like he's back in full team training or anything, but it also doesn't sound like Fabian Schar has been ruled out for the entire season. But for me, in the position that I'm in on bench boost and for most people, I still feel like based on this, unless Eddie Howe's lying and he just starts, which, by the way, I would not be surprised about, I think Fabian Schar is probably a sell. So take all of this with a pinch of salt, like I said, due to his track record, Eddie Howe in the press conferences. But my prediction is one start for Trippier, 1+ starts for Pope, Fabian Schar to not be available for 37, and you can make your decisions in and around that. But I still feel like the best shout that you've probably got for Newcastle assets is Burn, Gordon, and Isak, or potentially two of those, and then you take a punt on Callum Wilson, which may be the way that I end up going. But I definitely think those four, to recap, Burn, Gordon, Isak, and Wilson would be the four that I would be choosing from for Newcastle. So guys, this isn't a sponsored ad or anything like that, so don't worry. But for those of you that don't know, I'm currently doing a PhD looking at the role of virtual reality in elite football. So it's a sports psychology PhD. I'm coming towards the end of the PhD, but I'm currently recruiting participants for one of the main studies. And I'm hopeful that some of you might be able to take part. So it'll only be a select few, I would imagine, but do hear me out just in case you are able to take part. You can come along and meet me and hopefully take part in a really, really cool study. So as a brief background, as I said, I'm looking at virtual reality in elite football. And for this study, we're trying to see if we can develop a virtual reality decision-making task. So we basically need participants to come into the lab, take part in the study, and then obviously we'll collect the data and that will become part of my PhD. So here are the requirements for you to be able to take part. And if you feel like you meet all of this criteria and you'd like to help me out, please drop me an email. I'll link my university academic email down below and I'll flash it up on the screen as well. So the things that you need to be able to take part in this study, you need to be 18 years or above. So if you're 18 years old and above, tick the first box off. The second thing is you need to be playing competitive football at some level. So you basically just need to be playing for a team. It doesn't need to be a higher team, but you can't just play over the park with your friends once a week. It has to be at a competitive level. The most important thing, though, and this will probably rule out most of you, is I need you to be able to travel to Nottingham at some point between like June and September when we'll be collecting data. So if you're based in the Midlands in the UK or in around that area, then great. It should be very easy for you if you'd like to take part. But if you're based somewhere else in the UK or you're based abroad and you think you'll be over in the UK in that period and you think you can tie it in, that's great. I'm not urging people to spend loads of money to travel just to help me out. But if you are willing to come to Nottingham, that would be absolutely amazing. And I'll buy you a coffee, I suppose, if you travel quite a long way and we can have a bit of a chat about FPL. The other thing is obviously no medical reasons why you wouldn't be able to use VR. I'll obviously send you the forms if you feel like you are interested, but no medical reasons and no severe injuries that would stop you from being able to take part as well. And other than that, that's pretty much it. So key thing, 18 years old and above, you need to be able to play competitive football and basically be able to travel to Nottingham. The specific location within Nottingham is Clifton Campus if you want to check out where that is. So there we go. Please let me know if you think you can take part in this study. It would be a massive help to me. Even if only like 5 of you reach out, that's a big help during my PhD. So also please send this to like friends, family. If you know people in this kind of area, the Midlands area in the UK, or feel like, again, they can travel to this area that you know play competitive football and they might be interested, please feel free to send this video on to them or send my email address and get them to contact me. Basically, the more the merrier. I need as many participants as possible, and I'm hopeful that quite a few of you will be able to help me out here as well. So as I said, make sure to email me or just send me a message somewhere and then I can give you my email address. I appreciate you listening to this entire video. And yeah, fingers crossed I can meet a few of you and you can also take part in my experiment too. Dear Lord, we have discussed defenders a hell of a lot in recent weeks, but there are more questions coming in around the defenders, and this is a slightly different question. So obviously we know that the likes of Dan Burn, Gvardiol, Pedro Porro, and Arsenal defender, these are probably the best defenders to own for Game Week 37. We spoke about them in a lot of detail, and I think most people can comfortably pick out the best defenders from the teams that double, right? That's relatively easy. But I did have a couple of people that are like, listen, I've already got Burn, I've already got Porro, I've already got Gvardiol, so they're probably the three best you would... So probably the three best doubling defenders. And I've either already got one Arsenal defender or I just don't really fancy bringing in an Arsenal defender with one fixture in the double, which is absolutely fair enough, by the way. The data would suggest that they probably are still one of your best picks. But if you want to back against that, with only 2 weeks left, if Arsenal concede and everyone's doubled up like myself, then you could be in for a really good week if you bring in some other players. So I don't mind it. So maybe, as you can see for this person here, it's a -4 to remove Gusto. What do you do? So I think if you've got those three already, because they would be my favourite three, and you don't want to go for an Arsenal defender, I think my three favourite options are probably the ones on your screen, which is Romero, Cucurella, and Dunk. I think probably, arguably my favourite option, if you've got a spare Spurs slot and you don't want to move for a Richarlison, let's say you've got like Son, Porro, or Vicario, you don't want to go for the other one, and then you've got that third Spurs slot, and like I said, you don't think there's any chance of you wanting to go Richarlison this week or next week, and you don't mind loading up on three. Romero's had some really decent attacking threat recently. He's got the Burnley game. He's got the Sheffield United game. I think you could do a lot worse than Christian Romero. So I actually think he would be up there as one of my favourite options. I know for some people that will mean a double up on the Spurs defence, which you might not feel entirely comfortable about. But none of the defences for me look that likely to keep clean sheets in this double. So I think if you're going to go for it, going for the defence that has games against Burnley and Sheffield United might be a decent shout. So I think Romero would honestly be top of the list for me. Maybe I've not given him enough credit in the recent week or two. He's got some really good underlying data recently. After that, I still think if you're removing Gusto, and let's say you're not moving to Jackson, again, you've got that third Chelsea slot open, Cucurella's got to be in there for me because, yes, he's not fully nailed, but he started quite a few games in a row at the moment. And as we spoke about throughout the week, he's playing this inverted position, inverting into the midfield. And unless he plays Gusto on the other side inverting, I think Cucurella will continue to play that role. And even if he switches back to a traditional back four, Cucurella is going to be starting at left back for Chelsea. So I don't think he's perfect. I don't think he carries that much attacking threat, given that he's inverting into midfield and he's not flying up and down the flank at the moment. But Cucurella's got a very good chance for one clean sheet. He's actually up there. I think they're the third most likely team, according to market odds, to keep 1+ clean sheet this week. So you could definitely do worse from a clean sheet perspective. He's okay for bonus points. As long as he doesn't get booked or sent off, which he seems to love a card, then I actually think he's an okay option. So I like those two. And then probably third for me would be a Brighton defender. If you've got the money for Lewis Dunk and it doesn't prevent you from doing something in 38, I would probably go for Dunk because he's got a history of getting goals, especially in big double game weeks, right? Not all Brighton defenders have been good in previous double game weeks. If you know the reference, then you know. But Dunk does love a bullet header. It's a bit of a narrative, but we know that he is very good in the air. He'll always attack corners. He's actually okay for bonus points if Brighton keep a clean sheet. But the most important thing is he's very, very nailed. Whereas I think Webster and Veltman should start both. You could even argue that Igor could start both as well. I've seen some people look at Barco, but I just think you are running the risk that you only get one start. And in this double, with only 3 games left now, you want a player that's going to start every game. So I think, unless they've got like crazy high upside and it's worth the risk. So for me, I would probably go for Dunk if you can afford it. Out of Webster and Veltman, if they're the only ones you can afford, I've got honestly no idea. Veltman tends to be pretty good for bonus points, but Webster, again, more likely to get a goal from a set piece. So it's up to you. Just pick whoever you fancy. Pick whoever's name you like more. So those would be the defenders that I'd probably consider. But yes, if you don't have Burn, Porro, Gvardiol, I would bring them in. I suppose just a quick note to, for example, Walker, or probably just Walker's the only one I'd go for from City. But I'm assuming if you've got Gvardiol, you probably then also have 2 City attackers, so you don't have another City slot open. But if you do have that open, let's say you've not got Foden, doubling up on the City defence and going for Walker wouldn't be too bad either. So hopefully that helps you. I'd love to know down below if anyone's going for any cheeky punts in defence. So guys, we've got a similar sort of question here, but now with the forwards. So someone asked me, I'm already tripled up on Chelsea, I'm already tripled up on Newcastle, so I can't get to Wilson or Jackson. Are there any other forwards you need to consider? I need to remove Joao Pedro. So it's almost exactly the sort of question we've just had here, where you can't get to the ideal options, or in that case, you already own them. Are there any other forwards that I would consider? And the short answer is, no, not ideally, but you're going to have to probably anyway, unless you want to run the risk that Joao Pedro maybe gets some minutes. But I would probably remove him. And in all honesty, arguably the best option you could go to if you can't get to Wilson Jackson, let's say you already own Isak and Haaland, it may well be Danny Welbeck. His minutes have already been very secure. His data tends to be okay. And I just think, I know that Joao Pedro has actually been playing more like a number 10, slightly behind Welbeck or off the left. So I don't necessarily think that Joao Pedro is a direct relationship with Welbeck's minutes. But given that Joao Pedro is now also a doubt and some of the other injuries that they have, I wouldn't be surprised to see Welbeck start the remaining 3 games. He may well have done also, and also he might not. Again, given his injury record and his fitness record, maybe he gets a rest at some point. But I quite like the idea of going for Danny Welbeck because he is going to be like 1% if that. So he is a major differential. And I suppose there's a small chance at some point if Gross Weather are not on the pitch, he might get a penalty. But it should mean that Pascal Gross is on penalty. So I just think Danny Welbeck's a fine option. You could definitely do worse, but don't go out there expecting like 4 or 5 goals from him. If you're not going to go for Danny Welbeck, if you're looking for a doubling of forward, you've probably got 2 other options. So Rasmus Højlund, I wouldn't go there personally, and it's not because I dislike Højlund. I think Højlund will be a very, very good striker in the future, but he's incredibly raw, and the issue that we've got is we are just not set up in a way to feed the forward. I actually think this is a bit of an issue. I'm not going to go into a rant here, but a bit of an issue with modern football. The number 9 does a lot of running, does a lot of pulling centre-backs out of position, but the number 9 just doesn't get that many touches. Apart from someone like an Ollie Watkins, who often, by the way, also doesn't. But unless you're just a striker that finds ways to get very, very involved in the attack, I guess like a Kai Havertz is an example for Arsenal, but even like Haaland doesn't get that involved. Lots of teams are just set up in ways now where they don't really use the striker that much. And as a result, Højlund's just not really getting the chance to score. I mean, he's barely taking any shots. He's not got the data to support him as a pick. So I wouldn't go for Højlund in a million years. But I also wouldn't be surprised if he gets 1 or 2 chances in the double, because you could still get chances despite them being difficult fixtures. And if he does get the chances, he's a pretty good finisher. So I think there's a chance for a return, but I think your ceiling is probably quite low with Højlund. I would be very surprised if you get more than 1 or 2 returns from him. Someone that I think has a very high ceiling is actually Julian Alvarez, but how many starts he gets, I've got no idea. He could get 0, he could get 2, or he could get 1. No idea with him. I would predict it's probably more likely to be 0 or 1, but he will get minutes off the bench. And you never know. De Bruyne gets injured in the first game halfway through. Alvarez comes on and then he starts the second game. I'm not wishing injuries upon anyone, but with Alvarez, you know that he is pretty much first choice to come on if any of the key players get injured, whether that be Haaland, De Bruyne, Foden. So, and he could start even in a team where none of them are injured, right? We've seen it in the past where they pretty much start all of their key attackers, which I would not be surprised by. So yeah, I really like Julian Alvarez as a cheeky outside punt if you've got that third City slot open. If you're not going to go for doublers though, because I think they're probably the only 3 you can really consider. Maybe I've missed someone. If I have, let me know down below. You've got options like Ollie Watkins, Mateta. Well, Mateta would probably be top of the list based on the way he's been performing recently, but it does feel a little bit uninspiring. So I would say, in order for me, Welbeck, Alvarez, Højlund, Mateta, assuming again that you can't get to Jackson, you can't get to Wilson, and you've already got Haaland and Isak, because I think all of those are slightly better options. So I think there are a lot of people going into Game Week 37 with Arsenal assets in their team and wondering, especially if you've not got loads of flags to deal with and other issues, is it worth a transfer to remove an Arsenal asset to then inevitably bring them back in 38, essentially doing a hokey-cokey? Because I think most people can acknowledge that they probably are going to want Arsenal assets in Game Week 38, unless something happens in 37 where the title race is no longer up for grabs and one of the two teams wins. I think if someone is going to win it in 37, it would be probably City winning both their games and Arsenal losing to United, which I don't think is even possible, let alone likely. But you just never know. And it could also be that Arsenal win and City lose both their games. But I think based on the way that the title race is set up, we're thinking it's going to go down to Game Week 38. And therefore, you're going to want Arsenal assets at home for their final day of the season, and same for Man City as well. But Arsenal in particular, it maybe therefore doesn't feel as worth it removing them, knowing that you've got to go back for them again in 38, although you might not have to. So some of the questions that I've had is, would you remove Saka this week and then reverse the transfer in 38? So basically Saka to Richarlison and then back to Saka again. And then another question is, what do you think of Saka to Richarlison for a -4? So this time for a hit, but then Gordon to Saka next week for free. I think, in general, I'm not completely against the idea of a hokey-cokey, right? Taking Arsenal assets and bringing them back in. But I think it depends on whether you're taking a hit and who you're planning to bring in and then take out again. Because in this first example, right, whether this is for free or not, if you bring Richarlison in, unless he's getting injured, he's then got Sheffield United in 38. I don't like Richarlison to Saka in 38. I would argue that Richarlison's as good of an option as Saka in 38, or at the very worst, slightly worse option. Whereas Gordon, most people probably bench Gordon anyway because it's away. And whilst it's not an awful fixture, Gordon to Saka for free feels a lot better. So I feel like I would look at who you're bringing in and think, do you actually want to remove them again? And do you have another route to an Arsenal midfielder? So that's the first thing, is who are you removing and who are you bringing back in? But the other thing is, you might not necessarily want to firstly go for the same Arsenal midfielder. It might be that you say, yeah, do you know what? I'm going to remove Saka this week, and I am going to bring an Arsenal midfielder back in 38. But I might go for Martinelli, I might go for Ødegaard, I might go for Havertz. And that then makes me more tempted to do it, because it's like, do you know what? It might be that you think, actually, Saka's an injury doubt going into 38, or this happened or that happened, and I actually want to go with Havertz. Maybe you're chasing rank slightly more than you thought you would be. So it may be that you don't even return back to the same asset. So selling Saka this week, in that case, wouldn't be the worst idea. And then the final thing is, you might not go back to an Arsenal asset. It might be that, like I said, Arsenal somehow drop points against United. The title isn't up for grabs anymore. And actually, Salah looks like a monster once again against Villa. And you want to go all in on Salah for the final day of the season. So, yeah, I'm actually more and more on board with this idea than I thought I would be. The only reason I say that is Saka is a very small doubt for this week. He does only have the one fixture, and it could even benefit you in 38 if you end up moving to another Arsenal mid or being able to go somewhere else. It's not inevitable that you'd want to definitely go back again, but I certainly prefer the idea of like Saka to Richarlison and then Gordon to Saka than I do just going straight back and forth between the two, just because of their fixtures in Game Week 38. So I'd love to know down below what you're thinking of doing with your Arsenal players. The only thing I would say is, if you are to try and predict the way the Man United Arsenal game would go, I think reasonably, some people say like 7-0. It could be. It absolutely could be. Reasonably, 3 or 4-0 to Arsenal is probably a very reasonable prediction. The market odds would say about 3-0 to Arsenal seems fair. And so let's say Arsenal score 3 goals. If you're bringing in Richarlison, how many goals do you think Spurs score in Game Week 37? I'd love to know down below. Comment down below how many goals do you think Arsenal score, how many goals do you think Spurs score. I would say Spurs will win 3-1 against Burnley, and I think they probably lose 1-0, 2-0 to City, maybe like a 1-1. So I think Spurs will score 3 to 4 goals in the double, and I think Arsenal will score 3 to 4 goals in the double. So when I look at it like that, is it worth 2 transfers to do Saka to Richarlison, and then maybe bring Saka or another Arsenal mid back in, rather than just keeping the same Arsenal mid throughout? So I know I've just given you 2 very different opinions there. I suppose my initial thought to this was definitely don't do it. Man United are terrible. Arsenal are brilliant. I think they'll score lots of goals, and you're going to want an Arsenal midfielder probably in 38. But the more I think about it, I'm like, actually, it kind of does make a bit of sense, because you're getting a player with 2 fixtures, so the upside is definitely higher. You can then choose whether you want to go back to the same Arsenal mid, another one, or just move somewhere completely different. And so it is a rank chasing, high upside thing that could go well, but don't don't be surprised if it goes appallingly, right? If Richarlison doesn't do particularly well against Burnley, and then obviously City we're not expecting much, and then Saka returns a couple of times, like, you wouldn't be surprised to see Saka outscore Richarlison. So I'll leave it there. In traditional Raptor fashion, I have not given you a definitive answer, but I guess I'm fine with it either way. I think it really comes down to the stage of your season and your own risk appetite. So guys, just to finish up, this is the way that my team is currently looking ahead of my bench boost in Game Week 37. And no, we're not in a particularly good spot, but I need to prioritize and think about where I actually want to use transfers and how big of a hit I want to and need to take in my team. So despite what the flags say, it's not quite actually the full picture now based on the press conferences. So Fabian Schär looks like he is out. So my one free transfer, because I only have the one, will be Fabian Schär to Pedro Porro. I'm almost certain. So imagine Fabian Schär is Pedro Porro. Everything from there on in requires a hit. Now, I know Fernandes is flagged, but based on what we know, I think he's now got a very good chance of being available for 37, unless Ten Hag was lying. So I'm probably now going to end up keeping Fernandes, but I would love to get Richarlison in. So in midfield, if I do want Richarlison, I could just do Garnacho to Richarlison for a -4. So I would love to know down below in the comments, do you just think in isolation, ignore the rest of my team, ignore everything altogether, for Game Week 37 and 38, is it worth doing Garnacho to Richarlison for a -4? I think when you consider the Sheffield United fixture in 38 as well, I think it might be, but Garnacho is also a very decent option with 2 home fixtures. And if Fernandes is fit, it makes Manchester United and Garnacho just much better options. So I'm going back and forth on that because you could just continuously take hits on every single player. Like I might say, yeah, Cucurella is better than Gusto, take another hit. This player is better than this player, take another hit. And you end up stacking up like -20. So you can't just remove all of the players that don't look perfect. So I'm sort of going back and forth on that one. And then the other obvious issue is now looks like Joao Pedro is going to miss out. And even if he doesn't, I think he's enough of a doubt now that I probably need to remove Joao Pedro. So the options that I've got, based on the way my team currently is I can either do Gusto to another defender, whoever that may be, even like a Romero if I don't go for Richarlison. So Gusto to another defender, which then frees up the slot to do Joao Pedro to Jackson. So that's option number one. Let's say I don't make any midfield transfers. Gusto and Joao Pedro to Romero and Jackson. That would be a -8 in total to do the hokey cokey there. The other option I've got is just keep Gusto and then do Joao Pedro to Callum Wilson because I would be removing Fabian Schär. I don't have Gordon, which gives me that third Newcastle slot. So let me show you that in the transfer section. This feels like more like a live stream. By the way, on the live stream, internet's in the bin. So as of right now, possible but unlikely that I'll stream, but I'm going to work all Friday evening to see if I can come up with a bit of a solution. But I just want you to know I'm trying so hard to get my internet sorted, but it's a bit of a mess. Anyway, so let's say that Fabian Schär becomes Porro. We'll put that in place. So Porro in for Fabian Schär. What we then need to think about is, so Joao Pedro comes out. Like I said, I could do Gusto to Romero. I think he would be my favourite choice to come in because then at least I do have 3 Spurs for Burnley and Sheffield United. And I'm fully aware, by the way, I'm bringing in double Spurs defence and Spurs are really bad defensively. But like, who else do I move to? I could go for a Gabriel, but then I'm blocking a Arsenal attacker in Game Week 38. So I honestly think if it's not Romero, it would end up being, I don't know, potentially Cucurella if I don't move for Jackson, or it would be a Brighton defender. So none of them particularly stand out. And if I do that, that then offers me the route, I should say, to Jackson, and that's a -8 in total. So that's the first option. The other option is, like I said, just keep Gusto, and it's nice and simple, just Joao Pedro to Callum Wilson. And I think, in all honesty, I'm leaning that way at the moment. I think Jackson is probably a slightly better option than Wilson. But is he 4 points better? Maybe. But also ownership comes into this as well. And I mean, I'm 52k. It's not an awful rank. I'd like to finish top 50k, as I've said this week. But having a very lowly owned Callum Wilson, we saw what he did in double game week 36 last season when barely anyone owned him. I say barely anyone. I think it was like 30, 40%. But most people loaded up on Isak, and Callum Wilson was the one that went big. And we just know how good he is when he plays. I mean, he's barely played this season, but when he does, he's an absolute monster. Like at the start of the season, getting returns left, right, and centre, that 13-pointer against Wolves, comes back immediately, starts getting attacking returns again. 2 goals scored in the last 2. Callum Wilson, when he's on the pitch, he's brilliant. He really is, and I quite like the idea of squeezing him in. So I think at the moment, I'll click make transfers, but try not to ruin it and actually make them. I think at the moment, this is most likely. So Schär out, Joao Pedro out, Pedro Porro in, and then Callum Wilson in. But I am still tempted to do the Jackson switch instead. So there's that. let's say that I made those. Like I said, I then still do have the option. Do I want to do Garnacho to Richarlison for an extra hit? Do I want to do Gusto to Cucurella for an extra hit? I could still remove some of these players that are slight issues. I could even do Bruno Fernandes to Richarlison for a hit if I think that Bruno Fernandes is a serious doubt based on what we hear later today. So some moving parts here, but I would say those two transfers look fairly likely for me right now. I'd love to know down below in the comments with my team and 5.2 in the bank. If I just quickly refresh it so that you can see. So 1 free transfer, 5.2 in the bank. If this was your team, what would you be doing with it? And yeah, fingers crossed we can get a green arrow in Game Week 37 somehow. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 37 deadline decisions video. Only one more of these this season. This is a new series that we introduced, but I absolutely love it every week, and I think it's very useful for you guys, but also for me to talk through those final questions and dilemmas. And if you did enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button. Make sure to subscribe as well if you are new. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.